Hello beautiful friends, my name is Brittany. This is Rescues and Reads. Welcome back or welcome to the channel. I'm so glad this video found you. Today we are opening up the vlog for the next reading project that I am undertaking. And this reading project is going to be focused on Book of the Month's Book of the Year finalists. Reading all of the finalists for the years that I haven't already read yet and kind of coming back on here and summarizing my feelings on these books and whether or not I agree with the selections they made and whether or not I think we can trust Book of the Month readers who are voting on these books, if that makes sense. So if you've been with my channel for any length of time, you will know that I do quite a bit of content surrounding Book of the Month. I am a loyal Book of the Month subscriber. I have been a subscriber since 2018. And so that's 7 years of being a subscriber, a consistent subscriber to this service. And even when I don't necessarily think they are making the best selection choices every single month, I can't imagine myself canceling unless it gets egregiously terrible, because I have found so many new favorite books and authors because of the service. So I actually really appreciate what they have done for me and my reading life. And if you're not familiar, since 2016, Book of the Month has done a Book of the Year winner, where essentially out of all of the selections that they've made for the year, this is like the most popular one, the one voted on by the most Book of the Month readers. And I believe how it works is a few months prior to all of this happening, they announce a large number of nominees, and then we all are able to vote on those. And then the top 5 votes from those nominees are Book of the Year finalists. And then we are able to vote for which one of those finalists we want to be the Book of the Year. And so my plan for this project is to read all of the finalists and winners that I haven't already read since 2016. And then again, coming on here and sharing my thoughts and feelings. So this project is actually going to be broken up into 3-year increments, just because I don't need to read a large number of finalists in every year. In fact, there are some years where I only need to read 1 to none of the books because I have already read them. So we are going to be doing 2016, 17, and 18, which is going to be this vlog. Then we're going to be doing 2019, 20, and 21, and then 22, 23, and 24. And then going forward, since we will be caught up, I will probably just do a vlog about the finalists for the current year, if that makes sense. I want to talk about the books that I will be reading for 2016, 17, and 18, and you will be getting my up-to-date thoughts on each book as I read them. And then after 2016, I will come on here again and talk about all the 2016 finalists and the winner. So for 2016, these were the finalists: A Gentleman in Moscow by A. Martels, Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi, and All the Ugly and Wonderful Things by Braden Greenwood, which ultimately ended up being the winner for 2016. Out of all 5 of those books, the only book that I have not yet read and the book that I will be reading for this vlog is A Gentleman in Moscow by A. Martels. For 2017, the finalists were Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstance by Ruth Emmy Lang, Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, Sing Unburied Sing by Jessamine Ward, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne, which was the 2017 Book of the Year winner. And the fact that The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo did not win that year, I never really realized that before, and I am shooketh. So I am really interested to see how I feel about The Heart's Invisible Furies. It's gonna have to do a pretty damn good, amazing job for me to believe that it deserved to win over The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. So I think that this is going to be one of the heaviest years in terms of how much I have to read, because out of all of these finalists, the only one that I had read prior to this point was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, I am not going to be reading Sing Unburied Sing by Jessamine Ward, even though it was one of the finalists. And the reason for that is because I do believe that there is animal cruelty and violence within the story. I believe, from what I'm told, the story actually opens up with a pretty graphic butchering scene of a goat. And I do believe that animal cruelty and neglect is maybe not a main theme, but part of the theme of the story, which really is all about the poverty and hardship of the characters. And that's just not something that I'm going to subject myself to, even for a reading project. So I'm not going to be able to speak intelligently about this story, and I'm not going to be able to include it in my comparisons for anything else. So I will just be talking about the books that I actually did read. Now for 2018, the finalists were The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn, The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna, The Kiss Quotient by Ellen Huang, An American Marriage by Tayari Jones, and Circe by Madeline Miller. And again, the fact that The Great Alone did not win that year just breaks my heart. But out of all of the 2018 finalists, I don't need to read any of them because I have actually already read every single finalist slash winner for that year. So essentially, once I have read all of the books for 2017, I will be basically wrapping up everything at that point because I won't need to be going further with the 2018 year. So for this round of reading Book of the Year finalists, I only have to read 4 books, so hopefully this won't take too terribly long to get through. I'm looking forward to coming on here and sharing all of my thoughts about the finalists, including the ones that I've read previously and the ones that I will be reading for this project. So I will of course be starting with A Gentleman in Moscow by A. Martels and moving through the 2017 books, and then I will come on here to wrap everything up at the end. And I'm excited to see what I think about these books, especially since a lot of them are outside of my comfort zone. A lot of them were never on my radar. I never planned on reading them. And so it's going to be interesting to see what my reading experience is like for those. So we shall see. Stay tuned. Hello, everyone. So I am here with what is supposed to be my very first update for the first book that I'm going to be reading for this reading project, which is, of course, A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, which was the only 2016 Book of the Year finalist that I actually needed to read. And unfortunately, I am not only here to provide you with my first update, but my final update, because sadly, I have decided to DNF this story at about 12% of the way in. And I want to make it perfectly clear that this is 100% a me thing and not a book thing. Even just getting 12% of the way in, I can absolutely understand why this book is so highly regarded and beloved. It is definitely well written, and I can absolutely tell how charming it is, but this is not necessarily a book I feel like I'm able to appreciate at this point in my reading life. So backtracking a bit, this is set in 1922 in Moscow. It follows Count Alexander Rostov, who at the beginning of the story is convicted of being a social parasite by a Bolshevik tribunal. And instead of being sentenced to death, he is sentenced to house arrest. He is staying in this very luxurious hotel called the Hotel Metropole. He has this luxury suite in there and everything, and he is sentenced to essentially live in the hotel permanently. He's never allowed to set foot outside of the hotel. And after this sentence, he is removed from his luxury suite. He is placed up in like a small attic room, and this is going to be all about the people that he meets and comes into contact with, the relationships that he builds, and how he is able to live his life in house arrest during this time. And so this is definitely going to be a very slow-paced, character-driven type of story, and it's also going to be, as I could tell from the 12% that I read, going to be a very meandering story. And this is just not something that I feel like I am able to appreciate at this point in my reading. And so I just knew if I were to attempt to continue this story that I was not going to enjoy it to the extent that it deserved, and I didn't want to do that. So I just made the decision to go ahead and DNF it at 12%, and we are going to call that a day. As such, because I have DNF'd A Gentleman in Moscow, I have officially read all of the 2016 Book of the Year finalists. So what I want to do is quickly run through them and my overall thoughts and feelings and what I thought about the finalists for 2016. The winner for the Lolly in 2016 was All the Ugly and Wonderful Things by Bryn Greenwood. This is a story that I've talked about multiple times on my channel already because I loved it. Now, it is a book that covers hard topics. A lot of people are not going to be able to handle it because it features an inappropriate relationship between a very young girl and an older man, but it was so beautifully done and told that you actually root for this relationship. I can't explain it. If you've read the story, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I read this book years ago. I think I read it in like 2018 maybe, and it still sticks with me because I thought that it was beautiful, well written, and I loved the characters in here. And even though it was a somewhat disturbing relationship and inside you know that you're not supposed to root for it, you absolutely do. So I can fully understand why this won the Book of the Year in 2016, and I absolutely agree with it. Next, we have When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. Now, this was a memoir by Paul Kalanithi, who I believe was a doctor of some kind. I think he was a neurosurgeon, and he is actually diagnosed with cancer. But essentially, this is his memoir during that time of going from a doctor to a patient and kind of documenting his time during this experience as he has to come to terms with his mortality. Like, he knows that this is going to kill him. He's not going to survive this. And there's something very powerful in reading a memoir that is written by a dying man. And I think that it's something that we can all connect to on some level because we all have this in common, right? We are all going to die someday. We are all going to experience grief in some form as we watch loved ones die. It's all something that we have to confront. And this is Paul Kalanithi confronting it on page. And I think that touched a lot of people. Now, I am not a memoir person. I'm not a nonfiction person. And if I'm going to pick one up, I have to be invested in the person. And I knew nothing about Paul Kalanithi before I read this book. In fact, the only reason why I picked up this book was because it was going to satisfy a reading challenge for whatever year I read it in. And unfortunately, like, the subject alone and the motivation of the book alone was not enough for me to become deeply invested and connected in the story. I think the only part of the story where I was emotionally connected was the end, which was actually written by his wife after Paul had passed away. Like, I found that really, really touching. But again, I don't want to negate the importance of the story, and I can absolutely understand why people loved it. I don't really have much else to say about it, but I do understand why it was selected as a finalist. Next, we have The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, and I'm honestly really surprised to see this here because I feel like The Woman in Cabin 10 is almost always one of people's least favorite favorite Ruth Ware's. I hardly hear anybody speak positively about this book, but I actually really enjoyed it. I had a good time with it, but then again, I appreciate the type of books that Ruth Ware writes. She writes very slow, introspective, character-driven mysteries, very kind of like Agatha Christie-esque, I would say, and I don't think a lot of people understand that going in. They're expecting these really fast-paced, high-intensity thrillers, and that's not what they're getting, and that is definitely not what The Woman in Cabin 10 was. Now, it has, again, been many years since I read this. I do believe it follows some kind of travel journalist, and she's going to be going on the maiden voyage of this cruise ship, and while she's on there, she thinks that she hears somebody throwing a body overboard, and it's about her journey of survival. Like, nobody believes her, nobody thinks that she's telling the truth because like all the souls on board are accounted for, and she thinks she's going crazy, or people think that she's going crazy, but she knows that something is up and somebody is after her and she needs to survive. And like I said, I actually had a really good time with this, but even though I did have a good time with this, I'm not necessarily sure I'm convinced that it is worthy of Book of the Year finalist material. But again, I can't go back and see all of the other selections that they made for the year, so I can't say, oh, I think this thriller would have been better or anything like that. So all I can say is, even though I had a decent experience with Woman in Cabin 10, mostly I hear negative things about it, and so I'm actually really surprised to see it as a Book of the Year finalist for what it's worth. We also have Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which I'm absolutely not shocked to see here at all. Blake Crouch typically writes very high-octane, fast-paced, high-stakes sci-fi thrillers. This follows a physics professor named Jason Dessen who lives a quiet life with his wife and teenage son, but one night he is abducted and injected with a mysterious drug, and when he wakes up in a world that is familiar yet completely different, because in this world he is not a teacher, but he is a celebrated physicist who never got married and never had a child. This definitely explores the concept of like infinite realities and how one choice can affect your reality. All very complicated, very sci-fi, but very intriguing. The thing about Blake Crouch for me is that because his books are so incredibly fast-paced and a lot of the science goes just completely over my head, there's not a whole lot about his books that actually stick with me. You know what I mean? They are good and fun in the moment, but once the book is over, I don't think about it ever again. But a lot of people really love and adore Blake Crouch. His next release, called Recursion, is actually another Book of the Year finalist from a later year, so I will be talking about that at a future date. But obviously, like, he is a very beloved author, and so I'm not surprised to see Dark Matter here. And then of course that brings us to A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, which is not something that I feel like I can comment on because I'm not going to be completing the story, but almost everybody that I hear talk about this absolutely loves it. This is a highly regarded book, obviously, as it is a Book of the Year finalist, and so even though I didn't complete it, I can understand why, just because based on my limited experience, I do think it was well written, and I could understand how it was charming, because I think that the main character himself was pretty charming. All right, everyone, so that wraps up the 2016 Book of the Year finalists. I will be back when I have started the first book for the 2017 Book of the Year finalists.
People sure think they know what seems best. Too tired to argue, let's give it a rest. Yeah, pay no mind to what I just said. This is a safe place to...
Hello everyone. I have currently just arrived to work, but before I started my day, I wanted to go ahead and give you a quick update because I am very near the 50% mark into Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and we are finally getting to a place where something is actually happening and I could potentially see the trajectory of the story. Up until this point, it very much has been getting to know the characters and how they are connecting with each other in their lives. So I believe I mentioned that this is primarily following the Richardson family, which is consisting of a mom, Elena Richardson, a dad, and 4 children. And then you have Mia and Pearl. Mia and Pearl are living in a duplex that are owned by the Richardsons. And we are currently following how all of their lives are becoming entangled. Pearl is very much enamored by the Richardsons and their wealth and privilege, and so she is constantly over there hanging out every single day. She is now best friends with their teenage son, Moody, who is the same age as she is. Meanwhile, Izzy, who is the youngest Richardson child, she's very much the black sheep of the family. She is not like any of her siblings. She is very much enamored with Mia because Mia is very much a free-spirited person. She and Pearl essentially move anytime Mia has a new art project that she wants to pursue. So she's always over there with Mia, like helping her out and stuff. So these families are becoming very entangled, especially because Elena has also hired Mia to help with housework and cooking and stuff like that to help supplement her income. And we are currently at a point in the story where I think we are going to start building up to the climax. A family friend of the Richardsons, the McCulloughs, are trying to adopt a Chinese baby that was abandoned at a fire station. And the Richardsons are very happy for them because they've been trying for a baby for years with no success. However, when Mia learns learns this, she knows exactly who that baby is. It belongs to her coworker, BB, who in a very emotional state in postpartum depression thought that she had no other options than to leave her baby at this fire station. But now she's like stable, she's got a good job, and she wants her baby back. And so Mia tells BB what is happening and who has her child. And we are currently now in an intense legal battle as the family is fighting to keep this baby, whereas BB is like, no, this is my child, I want her back. And there's also a media sensation surrounding this, right? Where people are either on the side of BB or on the side of the McCulloughs. And when Elena finds out that Mia was the source of this leak, she is determined to figure out what is going on with Mia, because she has always seen Mia as very secretive. Mia is very private. She kind of skirts around anything regarding her past life, and Elena is determined to figure out what is actually going on with Mia. And I know that it's all going to come to a head, and it's going to kind of lead to that opening scene in the story where there is a house on fire. I'm not entirely sure how, but I just know that it's all going to come to a head, and I'm really, really intrigued. Even though third person omniscient doesn't necessarily work for me, I am very compelled by this story. I am enjoying how this story is told. I'm not having a hard time differentiating who is talking in the story. I understand who all the key characters are and where they fit in with the story. I don't think that I'm going to finish this today because I still have over 3 hours of listening time left. And after work, we are going out to dinner with my friends to this new restaurant, which is about like 30 or 40 minutes away. So it's going to be quite a busy evening, but I definitely do hope to finish it tomorrow while I'm getting ready to film and in between the sprints that I'm holding and stuff like that. So yeah, I am so pleased that I'm enjoying this one, and I look forward to seeing how it ends. Hello friends. I am here because I have just now finished Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and I'm feeling as though I have some mixed emotions about it. I am in that phase where I am kind of wondering what the overall point of the story was supposed to be. I felt overall that the story ended up being fairly anticlimactic in comparison to what I thought it was building up to or what I expected it to be. I went into this with very little knowledge. Everything that I had seen portrayed about this definitely indicated like an intense rivalry between Elena Richardson as well as Mia. And I don't necessarily feel like that is what this story was. I felt like the tension in here, the conflict, was very soft and unassuming. It was certainly a multi-layered story that was about multiple different things that Celeste Ng tried to touch upon, right? There were a lot of themes about class, race, and privilege going on throughout the story, especially when you're contemplating the adoption storyline. You were also definitely diving into the secrets that Mia held and that is also unraveled. I don't believe that the story ever really reached a climax or anything like that. It was just kind of slow and steady the entirety of the story. Now, I definitely say that the pacing of this was an issue. And even though I did find myself interested and compelled throughout the majority of the story, typically meandering stories such as this don't really work for me. You have a story like this that starts with the Richardsons' house on fire. Like, I don't think that's a spoiler. That's basically page 1. And so you know that ultimately the ending of this story is going to lead back to that, and you're expecting something far more explosive, but that's just not how it was. The best words that I can use to describe it were soft and quiet. And so ultimately, I don't feel like what it was leading up to was very satisfactory. And it also kind of had an open ending, which I also was not expecting at all. So I can definitely understand why this book would not work for a lot of people. Like I said, it was very meandering and non-linear. You're going through all of the children's lives, Elena Richardson's lives. You're also eventually by the halfway point diving back into Mia's past and learning what the secret is. So there was a huge portion of the second half of the story that was completely dedicated to Mia and the secret that she was keeping, like going back to before Pearl was born and all of the events leading up to Pearl's birth. I do also feel like there was an imbalance in character portrayal because Mia was very much portrayed sympathetically, whereas Elena was not. And when you were thinking about this and when you were reading this story, you're realizing that Elena is really not the villain here. I think Elena ultimately came off on page of like this caricature of the rich and the privileged, but in reality, Elena Richardson was a smart, intelligent woman. She was a career woman. She had her own successful career, as did her husband. And when she realized that Mia was hiding something, she wanted to figure out what it was, especially when she realized that Mia was the whole catalyst behind the drama that was now unfolding with the baby and Mia's friend. So a lot of the conflict does not actually happen directly between these two women. And kind of circling back to the point about Elena, I really do feel like Celeste Ng was trying to portray her as the villain when she really wasn't doing like anything villainous. She had a stand. She was taking a stand. She had a reason to take the stand and have this opinion, just like Mia had a reason to have her opinion. So I'm really conflicted because on the one hand, I was compelled by the story and I even was okay with the meandering when I normally am not, but sometimes it just meandered a little bit too far. I was expecting more explosive drama at the end of this. I was expecting this to work up to something more climactic and it just never did. It just kind of petered out at the end and left things a little bit open. So I didn't feel like there was a satisfactory ending. Now, there was nothing about this story that I outright hated. There was never a point when I wanted to stop reading or DNF it or anything like that. But I don't necessarily feel like this book resonated with me like it resonated with a lot of other people. I think for a strong portion of the story, I was gonna go with like a solid 4 stars, but because of the fact that it really petered out near the end to me, and because I don't feel like the ending was satisfactory, and I don't really feel like we got a good resolution, and I'm still not entirely sure what the ultimate point and purpose of the story was, so I think that I'm gonna settle on a 3.5 stars. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I will come back when I have started the next book in this project.
Never believed in love at first sight, but then you went and caught my eye, and I knew right then this was the first night of the rest of my life. I was never really brave back then, but I'm glad I went and took my chance, and I see right now that was the first night of the rest of my life. And now I realize I was always supposed to find you. And now I realize it was always supposed to be. It was always supposed to be.
Hi everyone. So I have started the next book for the 2017 round of reading Book of the Year finalists. Out of all of the books that I'm reading for this project, I am having to read a lot of books that are outside of my comfort zone, a lot of books that I wouldn't pick up if it weren't for this project. But out of all the books, if you were to read the synopsis of this, you would definitely know that this is by far one of the most non-Brittany books. It is a book called Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstances by Ruth Emmy Lang. And this is something that I would definitely classify as cozy, whimsical, magical realism. And cozy and whimsical are anti-buzzwords for me. I do not typically vibe with cozy or whimsical stories. Definitely not whimsical stories. They are just a little bit too abstract for me, but that is not what I would classify this story. I would say that this has more of a gentle whimsy. So this follows the story of a boy named Waylon Gray, but Waylon's story is told from the perspectives of all the people he has met whose lives he has touched. And Waylon is a very unusual boy because when he was 5 years old, his parents were killed in a car crash, and rather than go into foster care, he ran away, and he was actually raised by wolves for about 6 years before he was found and brought into a foster family. And it seems like Waylon can do things that other people can't do. He has these inexplicable abilities. Like, it seems like he can influence nature and the weather, and he can communicate with animals. And so we're learning all about Waylon through the eyes of these people. And I just really enjoy the way that this story is being told. Waylon is such a kind and gentle soul. He is so incredibly earnest. Like, he wants to learn and he wants to meet everyone. And he's just so incredibly sweet and compelling as a character. When people describe books as being like hugs in a book, I feel like that is what this book is, or is going to be. Like, this is going to be a hug in a book, and that is typically not my thing, but I am really enjoying this story so far. I like the way that Ruth Emmy Lang is telling this, and this does appear to be a story that is told maybe not necessarily in parts, but in years of Waylon's life, right? So we are introduced to Waylon while he is still living with the wolves. He is about 11 years old, through the eyes of Mary, who is a young girl who he meets and who decides to run away with him to live with the wolves. And then now we are in the perspective when he is a little bit older, he is living with a foster family, and we are getting the perspective of his foster sister, as well as a teacher at his school who is taking an interest in him and who is also maybe noticing that this boy is not like every other boy. And I have no idea where the story is going to go. I honestly don't. I don't necessarily think that there is an overarching plot to the story. I think that this is very much a character-driven story. It is about Waylon, it is about the people in his life, and I don't think that there's going to be like anything super climactic about this story. And again, this is not something that I would typically gravitate towards, but I am having a great time with this. I'm really enjoying this. For some reason, it is just hitting the spot for me, and I am looking forward to continuing with it. So I will come back and update you when I have a little bit more thoughts or when I have actually finished the book.
Supposed to find you. It was always supposed to be. I was always supposed to find you.
brave back then, and I'm glad I went and took my chance. And I see right now this was the first night of the rest of my life. And now I realize.
Hello friends, I am here because I have officially finished Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstance by Ruth M.A. Lang, and I just adored this book so much, y'all. I don't necessarily know if I have too terribly much else to say after my last clip. This was just such a gem. It was such a gem of a book. It was so incredibly heartwarming. Again, I stand by my assessment that this is a hug in a book for sure. It was just so incredibly impactful for being what I would classify as a soft book. Obviously, this book is more focused on the character than the plot, but the plot itself is a character. The plot itself is Waylon and telling his story through the eyes of the people who he has impacted. And it was just such a unique way of telling the story. And through this, you connect to Waylon and you are also connecting to these characters. There was even a beautiful little love story interwoven through this. And I love those types of stories where the romance is very much not a focal point, but you can feel it so strongly that you root for it. I enjoyed seeing how this very unusual boy grows into a very unusual man, but how he influences positively so many lives with just who he is as a person and the things that he's able to do, even though he's not necessarily doing them intentionally, right? Like he doesn't know how he's able to influence the weather. It's basically tied to his emotions, and how he can also influence nature. He grew an orchard overnight, essentially, and it's just so whimsical in that way. It's atmospheric. And what I told my patrons when I finished this book was, I feel like my heart grew 2 sizes after reading this book, because y'all know me. I like books that are dark and gritty. I like the gruesome, the violent, dark and messed up people doing dark and messed up things in my books. And this was absolutely the opposite of that. But I appreciate what Ruth M.A. Lang was trying to do in this story. I appreciate the character that she was trying to bring to life. She wanted to introduce us to Waylon, and she wanted to tell us why Waylon was so special. And I absolutely felt that at the end of the story. So it was beautiful. It was beautiful. It was a complete surprise to me. I was not expecting to love this book as much as I did. It's a book that has never ever been on my radar. I don't think I knew anything about it going in. And after reading the synopsis of this, I did not think that it was going to be a me book at all. But I think that this also goes to show you the power of potentially reading outside of your comfort zone, because you can find gems that you were never expecting to find. And so this was a win. I loved it. I haven't decided on what I'm rating it, but I think that I might be settling on a 4.5 just because I thought that it was beautiful. I cannot recommend it enough. If you think that you could potentially love this story, absolutely go read Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstances by Ruth M.A. Lang. I don't think that you will regret it. That's the end of the short little update. I will be back when I have officially started the last book for the 2017 Book of the Year finalists.
Everyone's running like they stole a dream. Images of magazines. Take your chance while you're still young. Glory flickers like
I have finally started the last book that is going to be featured in this round of reading the Book of the Year finalists. So the very final book that I needed to read for 2017 is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. So going into this, I was definitely hesitant. I was a little bit nervous. This is almost 600 pages of literary historical fiction, and I read full-fledged fantasy novels that are less page count than that. So to say I'm intimidated by this book is a little bit of an understatement, especially after my experience with A Gentleman in Moscow by Amar Tolls, because I have a feeling that this is going to be somewhat similar in terms of the fact that the whole entire plot of the story is going to be following the life of one person, and that is Cyril Avery. So really quickly, just to give a bit of context as I was looking into this book, John Boyne actually started writing this shortly after Ireland finally voted to amend its constitution to allow gay marriage. I know that for quite a while in Ireland, being gay was an actual crime. You could go to prison for being gay. And so after the Constitution was ratified and this amendment was put in, John Boyne kind of wanted to write a book about somebody's experience with being queer during a time when it was not legal to be queer in Ireland. And so that is essentially what this story is. We start the book in 1945 when Cyril has not yet been born, because his 16-year-old mother has just found out that she is pregnant with him. And at the beginning of the story, she is being excommunicated by the Catholic Church and her family has sent her away in shame. They don't want want anything to do with her. So we are following her as she goes to Dublin seeking a better life, and then what happens up until the birth of Cyril. And then we fast forward 7 years later to 1952 when Cyril is 7 years old, and he has been adopted by a wealthy couple named, I think, Charles and Maud, if I'm not mistaken. And their adoption of him is kind of like more of a business transaction. They really don't have any affection or interest in him as a child. In fact, they always tell him that he'll never be a real Avery, and they make him call them by their first names, which is very odd. And we're following him during this time, and it's here when he's 7 when he meets Julian Woodbead. And this is going to be, I think, the central relationship of this story. But it's kind of like during their first interactions that Cyril, even at the tender age of 7, when he doesn't really understand sexuality or what it means to have sex or really to be gay, kind of starts to understand that he might like boys. And I have just now gone into the point 7 years in the future when Cyril is at boarding school and Julian ends up becoming his roommate at this boarding school, and they are 14 years old. And Cyril is definitely having sexual feelings towards Julian. Julian, for his part, he's definitely very crude. He is supposedly all into girls. All he talks about is having sex with girls and all the things that he wants to do to them. And that's very frustrating to Cyril, and it's frustrating to me as the reader. He's very crass, like always talking about women's boobs or getting blowjobs or things like that. So there's definitely some full-on male humor, some obsession with men's nether regions. That's really one of the only things that I'm not appreciating about the story. I am surprised that for the most part, I am having a pretty decent time with this. I would say that I'm just now like over the 20% mark. Like I said, y'all, this book is long. This is a 21-hour long audiobook. It's almost 600 pages. So this is not something that I'm going to be able to fly through. It's something that I'm going to have to take my time with, like it or not, just because it's going to take me several days to get through at my typical listening speed. And so even though I am now 20% of the way, like I said, Cyril is only just 14. And from what I understand, this is going to follow his life up until 2015 when this amendment has been made to the Constitution. So over 70 years, we are going to be following Cyril's life. I'm actually having a really decent time. I am interested in Cyril and interested in his life, and I'm wanting to go on this journey with him and figure out what the trajectory of his life is going to be, what the projection of it is, challenges that he's going to face as a queer man in Ireland during this time. I think that it's going to be very poignant. We haven't really gotten to that point because Cyril is still a child, and I think that is probably what is losing me just a little bit, but I think that I'm going to just love it even more as Cyril grows. Now, my enjoyment of the story kind of makes me question what exactly it was about A Gentleman in Moscow that wasn't working for me, because I feel like these are very similar in a lot of ways, right? They're definitely going to be slower paced. They're going to be almost entirely character driven with very minimal plot. Like there's going to be underlying messages in this story for sure, especially about homophobia and gay rights and everything like that. But essentially the plot is the life of this man, just as the plot in A Gentleman in Moscow was the life of Alexander Rostov. You know what I mean? So I really am not entirely sure what this book is doing right that A Gentleman in Moscow wasn't doing right. Maybe I find John Boyne's writing style a little bit more grounding, whereas I felt Amor Towles's writing was a bit too flowery. What I am thinking is that it is primarily the narration style, because A Gentleman in Moscow was narrated in third person, and I believe it was third person omniscient, whereas The Heart's Invisible Furies is told in first person past tense. So it's definitely a lot more intimate and confessional, and I feel like we are able to more deeply connect with Cyril as a main character, and I don't feel like I was getting that with A Gentleman in Moscow. Now, I DNF'd A Gentleman in Moscow at 12%, but even with just in the first pages of Heart's Invisible Furies, I was enjoying it immensely more than I was A Gentleman in Moscow, and I was already feeling that more intimate connection with the story, if that makes sense. I just find it interesting that these more literary historical fiction types of stories, I'm having vastly different reading experiences. So I may try to come on here when I'm closer to like the 50 or 60% mark, since I am doing a fairly early update in a longer book, but otherwise I will come on here to finish the story and tell you my thoughts.
Candle in the desert sun. Wasted time on an overpass, watching how nothing lasts. The streets are filled with a hollow glow. The bellies ache where shallow hungers grow.
Hello friends, I am here because I have have finally finished The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne, and I absolutely adored this book, y'all. I decided not to come on here and give you a midway check-in point despite the length of this book, simply because the entire plot of the story is following Cyril on his journey throughout his life. It's about his experiences of essentially being queer and what that looked like from the time of his birth to 2015 after the amendment in Ireland. And I felt like if I were to come on here and do a midway check-in, it would eventually ultimately lead to me talking about where we were in the story in terms of like Cyril's life and what he was going through. And I didn't want to risk any spoilers because I really feel like you need to go on the journey with Cyril in order to fully understand and appreciate what was happening in the story, because in all honesty, it was so incredibly heartbreaking. It was frustrating. The amount of bigotry and hatred and loss that Cyril has to go through simply because he is queer is absolutely nauseating. And I'm so thankful to John Boyne for creating a story that really reminds us of why pride is so important. So I couldn't really pick a better book to have read in June during Pride Month, because I do think that the story is incredibly important. If you enjoy character-driven stories, if you enjoy like literary / historical fiction type stories, I highly recommend. Even if you don't necessarily think this book could be your genre, I still do recommend giving it a try, simply because it is so incredibly important. And so ultimately I thought that this was just a really beautiful, impactful, poignant story, and I'm really glad that I read it. I fell in love with Cyril throughout his journey. I felt like I knew him. I felt like I just wanted to go and give him a hug. This was incredible. I think that I'm gonna go ahead and settle on a 4.5 stars. I think what really kept this from being a 5 stars is simply because of how slow it felt and how meandering it could feel at times, but also there was a lot of vulgarity in this story. I didn't really feel like it added to the story at all, and so that frustrated me. It was particularly with regard to Julian, who was Cyril's best friend. So I could have done without that, but for the most part, I really appreciated what John Boyne did with this story, and I highly recommend. All right, so now that I have finished all of the 2017 finalists that I have read, and because I don't need to read any of the 2018 finalists, we're gonna go ahead and talk about my thoughts and feelings on the 2017 and 2018 finalists. So just to kind of quickly recap, for 2017, I read, of course, The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne, which I just said that I absolutely loved, and I gave a 4.5 stars. I also absolutely loved Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstance by Ruth Emmy Lang. That book came out of absolutely nowhere and just wrapped me up in the biggest hug, and I absolutely adored that story. I think I'm gonna go ahead and settle on a 4 stars, maybe not quite a 4.5, but I did really love that story. I also read Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, which I think was my least favorite book that I read for the 2017 finalists. I think that I have officially settled on a 3.5 stars for that. It wasn't as impactful as I was hoping it would be. And then of course I had already read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which y'all know is one of my favorite books of all time. I really don't think I need to speak more about that story because I constantly talk about my love of that book. And then I didn't read Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward, simply because I know that there are going to be some forms of animal cruelty or neglect featured throughout the story. Now moving on into 2018. So the book of the year winner for 2018 was Circe by Madeline Miller. And in all honesty, I did not love this book, y'all. I really didn't. I found it incredibly boring, and it did not do much for me. But again, we find ourselves in a situation where this is a book that is highly regarded, it is highly loved. So am I surprised to see it here as the book of the year winner? Not necessarily. For my own personal taste, it would not have even made the finalist list. But again, when I'm judging these finalists, I can't just judge it based on my own personal taste. I have to consider it within the wider context. Next, we have An American Marriage by Tayari Jones, and I read that several years ago, and I'm gonna be honest and say that I did not love that book. I think I gave that book a 2 stars. I don't remember too terribly much about it, but I do believe it follows an African-American couple, and the husband is actually convicted of a crime that he did not commit. And this is the story of their life and marriage throughout this time and the troubles that they experience as part of his incarceration. Like what happens after he's released and she's kind of moved on to another man and stuff like that. I do remember that there was obviously a lot of commentary about racial prejudice and the American justice system, all of course very important and timely commentary, right? But overall, I just didn't emotionally connect to the story. And by the time that I got done reading it, I was really wondering what the ultimate point of the story was. It was kind of like a Little Fires Everywhere situation where I got done with it and I was like, what ultimately was I supposed to take from the story? So unfortunately, I don't necessarily agree with this placement in the finalists. And I honestly don't really hear anybody talk about this book since then. It received widespread popularity back when it was first released. Nobody talks about it anymore. Then we have The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang, which was a romance. And I remember reading this back when it was first released and loving it. I absolutely loved this. this. This follows an autistic woman named Stella who really wants to get better with regard to sex and relationships, and so she hires a male escort to teach her about these things, and it's about their love story and them falling in love. And I just thought it was so incredibly beautifully done, and I loved the representation of somebody on the autism spectrum. In fact, the other two books in this series do also feature that same representation, although those books were not nearly as strong as The Kiss Quotient. So I'm actually really pleased to see this here as part of the 2018 finalists. Then of course we get to The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna, and y'all know that that is my favorite Kristen Hanna to this date. I still love that beyond any other Kristen Hanna that I've ever read, particularly because the atmosphere in that story was a character in the story, and it just added to the intensity that the story brings you. It essentially follows a little family consisting of a mother, father, and daughter, and the father is a very unstable, violent, angry man. He is a Vietnam veteran and he came home with a lot of PTSD. He's very volatile, and he decides that moving his family to Alaska is going to help solve all their problems. But what he really doesn't take into account is the long months of darkness that Alaska experiences. And so this just kind of exacerbates the problem. He is a very violent, abusive man, and their lives are in danger while they are up here in Alaska, and it's about their fight for survival and what they have to overcome. If I had to choose any of these 2018 finalists to win, I would have selected this book to win. But alas, I do absolutely agree with its spot as a finalist. And then the last finalist that we had was The Woman in the Window by AJ Finn, which was very, very popular during its time when it was released. I remember reading it and enjoying it. It follows a reclusive alcoholic woman who is afraid to leave her home, and she essentially gets her entertainment by spying on the neighbors. And one day she thinks that she witnesses a murder in the house across the street. And it's about that journey because nobody is really believing her, right? She is an unreliable narrator. This came at the height of using the trope of alcohol to make a narrator unreliable. It was at the time when this had not been completely overdone. And so I think that this was a little bit more acceptable at the time that AJ Finn wrote the story. Am I surprised to see it here because of its level of popularity? No, but do I think that there were probably better books that were published that year to receive this spot? Yes. All right, everybody, that is it for this round of reading the Book of the Year finalists. Please comment down below and let me know if you enjoyed this project. Let me know if you have read any of the books that were featured as finalists in 2016, 17, and 18 and what your thoughts are. I would love to know. Or if you made it to the end of this video and you are not feeling chatty, go ahead and give me like a little award emoji in honor of reading the Book of the Year finalists. And as always, if you like this video or if you just like me, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I typically post 2 videos a week, one on Wednesdays, one on Sundays, and I would love to connect with you in any of those featured videos. I always appreciate it when you take the time to leave me a comment and interact with me on my channel. But if you do prefer to connect with me outside of BookTube, you can always find links to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Patreon, as well as YouTube memberships linked down below, along with any books featured in the video. Until next time, y'all. Bye.